Afraid and panicked and worried, thousands of Afghans mobbed Kabul's Hamid Karzai International Airport in a desperate attempt to flee. Hundreds of thousands more line up two border crossings between Pakistan and Afghanistan to allow humanitarian migration. The Kaman border, which is also a central transit point, will remain open from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. daily, while the southern crossing in Spin Boldak is allowing holders of Pakistan or Pakistani national identity cards safe passage. Afghans were frightened the country will revert to the harsh Islamic law imposed by the Taliban when they ruled the country from 1996 until 2001. It was also a time when women were forced to wear burqa and accompanied by a male relative when they ventured outside. Women are also barred from advancing in education or working outside the home. Music is also banned, thieves lose their hands, and adulterers are stoned to death. However, the Taliban have presented themselves as a more moderate group in recent years and vowed not to exact punishment to collaborators of the past regime. Still, a majority of Afghans are skeptical of the militia. Will there be a return of the Al-Qaeda? U.S. intelligence was quick to warn the return of extremism. The Osama bin Laden-funded Al-Qaeda to regain a haven in Afghanistan, with the Taliban taking back control of the country. But the Taliban have pledged to fight terrorism and will not allow their country to be a base of terrorist groups. Perhaps they learned their lessons when U.S. forces toppled them in 2001 for harboring bin Laden, who used Afghanistan as its base to launch its attacks on U.S. soil on 11 September 2001. In addition, the U.S. military gained technological advancement in the past 20 years, vastly improving its capability to eliminate suspected terrorists remotely without stationing troops in any region. Intelligence reports also indicated that Afghanistan is home to an Islamic State group affiliate that launched a series of attacks targeting Shiite Muslims in the region. Although the Taliban condemned the attacks and fought the IS over territorial disputes, it remains to be seen if they will sustain suppressing the Islamic extremists. There is so much uncertainty as to the future of Afghanistan. One thing is clear, with the US pullout from the region, desperate Afghans worry about what will happen to their country. With the hasty withdrawal of the US and Afghanistan, regional powers are seen to increase their influence in the region dramatically. These are how the world reacted with the speed when the Taliban regained control of Kabul. The Philippines quickly mobilized emergency flights out of Pakistan to repatriate Filipino citizens trapped in the Afghan conflict, with the Department of Foreign Affairs spearheading transportation arrangements. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque urged Filipinos to coordinate with the Philippine Embassy in Pakistan, which has jurisdiction over Afghanistan, to facilitate their repatriation. The DFA said its foreign service posts in the region and beyond are exploring all avenues of cooperation and are closely coordinating with governments and international partners to guarantee their immediate and safe passage. On Sunday, 32 Filipinos were evacuated to Doha, awaiting their confirmed flights to the Philippines. A group of 19 Filipinos is also set to leave immediately. The department has recently issued Alert Level 4 for the whole of Afghanistan due to the uncertain security situation in the country. Chinese state news agency Xinhua reported Beijing had urged Washington to play a constructive role and support a peaceful reconstruction of the country. China is willing to communicate and dialogue with the US to push for a soft landing of the Afghanistan problem, preventing new civil war or humanitarian disaster in the country to avoid it from becoming a breeding ground and shelter for terrorism, and encouraging Afghanistan to set up an inclusive political framework in line with the Afghanistan situation, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said. Pakistan appeared the most welcoming in the return of Taliban rule in Afghanistan. The Prime Minister Imran Khan congratulates the Islamic fighters for breaking the chains of mental slavery in Afghanistan. Khan described the Taliban's victory as a triumph. Russia also welcomed the regime change in Afghanistan. If we compare the negotiability of the colleagues and the partners, I have long since decided that the Taliban is much more able to reach agreements than the puppet government in Kabul, Zamir Kabulov, Russia's presidential envoy to Afghanistan, said on state television. U.S. President Joe Biden broke his silence on Monday and blamed Afghan leaders for their lack of willingness to defend their own country and leave the fighting to American troops. He stood part on his decision to withdraw from the war-torn country that cost American taxpayers over $2.3 trillion during the 20-year war and warned the militant group of devastating force should they interfere with the U.S. pullout. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani abandoned his presidential palace in Kabul and fled the country on Sunday as Taliban militia closed in on the capital. Ghani later took to social media and posted on his Facebook justifying his hasty retreat to avoid further violence. The Taliban have won and are now responsible for the honor, property, and self-preservation of their countrymen, he wrote on Facebook. He added countless patriots would be martyred and the city of Kabul would be destroyed if he will not leave the country. He did not say where he would go. However, on Monday it was reported he fled to Oman after his plane was denied entry by the Tajikistan government, and it is believed Ghani will fly to the US to seek asylum or probably regain some political foothold. In Washington, Afghan journalist Nazira Karimi could not hold back her tears as she asked Pentagon officials during a press conference about the whereabouts of Ghani. In between sobs, Karimi asked Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby, "Where is my president? He has to answer to people." As you know, I'm from Afghanistan. I'm very upset today because Afghan women didn't expect that overnight all the Taliban came. They took off my flag. This is my flag. They put their flag. Everybody's upset, especially women, she added, pointing to the Afghan flag on his face mask, according to news agency ANI. However, the U.S. State Department will not categorically state if Washington will recognize Ashraf Ghani as the Afghan president. So this is something that we are working on with the international community, State Department spokesperson Ned Price responded when asked who Washington recognized as the leader of Afghanistan. Coming at the heels of the Soviet-Afghan War, it is believed that the Taliban emerged in 1990 from northern Pakistan's religious schools that preached stricter Islam. Their promise? Restore peace and security in Pakistan and Afghanistan, torn by Muslim guerrilla infighting. This they would do through the enforcement of stricter interpretation of Islamic law. The ripples of Taliban influence are quick and relentless, from southwestern Afghanistan to when it took control of 90% of the country in 1998. Wary sentiments led to the positive reception of the Taliban in Afghanistan, reinforced by the group's reputation of eradicating corruption and lawlessness, making the country conducive for trade. However, the promise has a downside as the Taliban were inclement in their public executions of criminals and even prohibitive of Afghans' way of life, banning entertainment and choosing who goes to school. Human rights and cultural violations were attributed to the Taliban too. Taliban is most prominent for the murder of schoolgirl Malala Yousafzai in Pakistan and coddling prime 9/11 World Trade Center al-Qaeda suspects led by the late Osama bin Laden. In retribution, a US-led military offensive swept across Afghanistan and displaced the regime. Taliban, however, later regained strength and sowed violence in the lands they reclaimed. In February last year, the US-Taliban peace deal promised that the US would leave Afghanistan by 11th of September, exactly 2 decades since 9/11. The US feared the country would suffer from an aggravated Taliban-led civil war, taking advantage of the withdrawing superpower. Many major Afghan cities have fallen in 2 weeks as US-trained Afghan soldiers abandoned their positions without firing a single shot. Most recently, Kabul was taken over the group after President Ashraf Ghani left the Afghan capital, an open city. Speaking from the presidential palace, the Taliban lead negotiator said the takeover of Kabul is an opportunity for the Taliban how they can serve the nation. He assured that under the Taliban, Afghans are assured of peace and a better future. But contrary to it, fear lingered in Afghanistan, apparent when Afghans stormed Kabul airport to escape the country desperately. How did the Taliban capture Afghanistan in 10 days? The most apparent answers: corruption and unwillingness to fight for their country. Add low morale to the mixture with the eventual pullout of US troops by September, and you have a perfect formula to abrupt capitulation. Afghanistan is US's longest war. The US and its allies spent over $2 trillion in its 20-year war in Afghanistan, including $88.3 billion to train and equip the Afghan security forces from May 2002 to March. Since 2001, the US taxpayers allocated nearly $1 trillion to the Overseas Contingency Operations budget for the Department of Defense, $530 billion on interest payment on the money borrowed for the war, and another $144 billion was appropriated to the Afghan reconstruction. With the billions of dollars for training and equipment, it is pretty shocking that Afghan troops lack ammunition and supplies on the battlefield. Worse, the number of security personnel is bloated by ground commanders to pocket the payroll. Quickly gaining momentum from its almost bloodless victory in other Afghan cities, the advance of Taliban to Kabul wasn't even met with resistance when President Ashraf Ghani fled the scene. The Taliban is forming an inclusive Islamic government and reconciling with factions, assuring Afghans of security and peace by enforcing their version of Islamic law. But why are people desperately fleeing? Many fear the rule would reimpose the Taliban's violence and oppression the country had seen before the US came in from 1996 to 2001. Many are even worried the deteriorating situation would see the Taliban exacting revenge on Americans and the government.
In 2020, the United States signed a peace deal with the Taliban. It addresses 4 issues: a ceasefire, withdrawal of foreign forces, reduction of violence, starting intra-Afghan negotiations, and that Afghanistan would never again coddle terrorists. The deal is only a first in a series of steps seen to achieve lasting peace in the region, a country torn by war that killed 157,000 people and cost the United States more than $2 trillion. The American invaded the country in retaliation for the 9/11 attacks that killed more than 3,000 Americans. The attacks were carried out by the Osama bin Laden-led terror group Al-Qaeda, which used Afghanistan as their base of operations. Since the signing of the peace deal, the Taliban had softened its aggression against American and coalition forces, save for rocket attacks and US bases in July and August. The Taliban has redirected its resources to attacking Afghan forces instead. Moreover, despite its pledges to fight terrorism, the Taliban was discovered to be still closely tied to Al-Qaeda when Afghan forces killed the leader of the terrorist group. Also, instead of negotiating a power-sharing deal, a military takeover of its government. Other than Donald Trump, former President Barack Obama also ordered the withdrawal of US troops in Afghanistan in 2014. President Biden's followed through Trump's plan, contemplating a smaller footprint, a skeptic of US continued presence in Afghanistan. In these times of crisis, how will the world adjust? When we are all left asking, Afghanistan, what is happening? This has been Michelle Gilliang for Daily Tribune. A horrifying footage shows 2 people falling from a plane after takeoff. These are desperate Afghans clinging on a moving US Air Force plane, while hundreds of people running alongside the military jets departing the Hamid Karzai International Airport are described as the defining images of Western intervention in war-torn Afghanistan. Days after the capital Kabul again fell into the Taliban's control, the race to escape Afghanistan is growing more desperate as nationals from across the globe and worried Afghans frantically find ways to leave the turmoil. Over 60 countries issued a joint statement calling on the Taliban to allow international citizens and Afghans who leave the country to depart and called for borders and airports to remain open. The governments of Australia, Canada, Germany, Italy, Japan, Republic of Korea, Qatar, the United Kingdom, and the United States said that those in positions of power and authority across Afghanistan bear responsibility and accountability for the protection of human life and property and the immediate restoration of security and civil order. The Afghan people deserve to live in safety, security, and dignity. We and the international community stand ready to assist them, they said. On Tuesday, evacuation flights out of Afghanistan resumed, ferrying Western nationals, including diplomats and civilians, out of the country after the U.S. security forces' withdrawal that saw rapid advance of Taliban into the capital, Kabul. The Taliban negotiated with the Pakistani government to reopen the Chaman border, a major central transit point between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. daily. South of the country, the Spin-Boldak border crossing allows holders of Pakistani or Pakistani national identity cards safe passage. Meanwhile, harrowing clips from the tarmac of Kabul's international airport showing thousands of desperate citizens filling the runway and holding onto a wheel of a moving plane, while others climbing atop a departing aircraft will continue to haunt us. In these times of crisis, how will the world adjust when we are all left asking, Afghanistan, what is happening? This has been Michelle Gilliang from Daily Tribune. The American government spent over $2 trillion in a tragic 20-year campaign in the Afghan war, but has nothing to show for it but blood in the sand. President Joe Biden defended the U.S. exit, citing the American lives lost in the war to weather criticisms. But the immensity of its failure in Afghanistan reverberates across the four corners of the globe, with devastating CIA and military interventions in the region. The whole world is still unable to get a grip of the extent of America's misadventure. In defending his decision, Biden said America could not afford to extend its involvement in the Afghan civil war and said the deteriorating situation in the country is sad proof that no military force would ever deliver stability, unity, and security in the region. Biden said, "This is not in our national security interests. It is not what the American people want. It is not what our troops, who have sacrificed so much over the past 2 decades, deserve." America went to Afghanistan with guns blazing almost 20 years ago with clear goals: get those responsible for the 9/11 attacks. It was also to ensure Al-Qaeda could not use Afghanistan as a base to launch attacks on the US. Biden said this remains the country's only interest. With its officials fleeing Afghanistan, Biden said American troops should not be fighting and dying in a war Afghans are unwilling to fight for themselves. Biden inherited a peace deal former American President Donald Trump negotiated with Taliban. Estimates by Brown University's Cost of War project showed the U.S. spent more than $2 trillion on the war in Afghanistan, including direct funding costs of $800 billion and $83 billion to train the Afghan army. American service members killed in April, 2,448, contractors, 3,846, Afghan security forces, 66,000, NATO members and allies, 1,144, civilians, 47,245, Taliban, 51,191, aid workers, 444, and journalists, 72. In the aftermath of the Taliban's regaining control of Afghanistan, many were quick to blame the Democrats and Republican policies. But in truth, the failure in Afghanistan reflects the collapse of American political culture. In these times of crisis, how will the world adjust when we are all left asking, Afghanistan, what is happening? This has been Michelle Gilliang from Daily Tribune.